subject matter today is the future of the workplace. So we've got John and Duncan's going to be joining us later, who are going to give us some presentations, and after each one, as chair, I'm going to invite questions via the chat facility. So if you can send your questions through that during those presentations, the Q&A will be directly after each speaker. So it just gives me a chance to say a few words as a board director of the Chamber. I've been a member for 35 years now of the Chamber. And of course, with COVID-19, it's extraordinary times. We can all agree to that. But the good thing is with the Chamber, it provides support, guidance, how to get funding with the COVID-19 support facility, which is brilliant. These tutorials, there's engagement, further support with the networking groups we're continuing, thinking ahead for the future. And of course, I'm proud to be a member of the Chamber because of the way that we've been working forward to help you with the team. So that's a mention to Joe and Tudor for the great work they're doing. And of course, today we're joined by Molly and Neil, who are helping us with this facility. Later during the proceedings, we will give you a couple of other events that will be coming up to share some information with you. And also we have a polling, so we'd like to ask for a bit of feedback. So do stay on later and we'll remind you of that as well. So it just gives me a chance to say a few words where, coming back to the future of the workplace. We know there are changes. There's going to be a lot of planning and adapting that we have to do within the scope of our own business. And I think not only, of course, we have to look at the well-being of staff and the customers, but I think by creating a relevant communications plan and even continuity planning is essential. I think some businesses probably already had some things in place ready for Brexit for these challenging times that have become useful, but I think it is important, just God forbid if there's another spike, that we're ready to react for that as a business as well. But more importantly, going forward, I think those businesses that take on some of the information today, for example, to move forward with those challenges will be the winners and they will have the longer term benefits. I think that's quite important. Obviously, businesses will have to develop new sets of skills for virtual selling. I think there's been a couple of seminars that have been reaching out on the base to provide further information. And as things change, the winners will also be those that lead in video conferencing like we're doing now. And who knows, maybe have sales pitches that provide within the scope of those platforms. And also, of course, to promote the selling culture and look at mental health. There's an awful lot of things that businesses need to do. Very challenging again, but you need to be forward planning and make sure you're ahead of the curve. I hate to use that expression, but I've used that for many, many years within business. And again, you'll be the winners that move forward in that respect. I just thought I'd share with you a little tiny bit of polling that I saw yesterday, where 26% of Brits, that's 1 in 4, says that even with a vaccine, they will go out less and they will spend less, particularly in restaurants. That's an interesting thing. But more people will travel more. So maybe there will be more spend. And the only other thing I wanted to share with you was where I noticed with regards to brands that it's interesting to see what communications you personally may have had within the scope of you buying things. You're hearing from your suppliers as to who have reached out to you during this period. And it's interesting that supermarkets and health care and food are at their top, so they've been engaging the most. The ones that haven't have been the automotive, fashion, charities, gyms, and social media, surprisingly. So, maybe reactions of this is going to change where people's buying habits are thinking, well, you haven't reached out to me during this period. I haven't heard from you. And that's an interesting observation with that as well. So I think you've heard enough from me in relation to the intro. But let's just go on to some housekeeping aspects you may have seen before if you joined these meetings. We would ask you if you could please keep your camera on as possible, keep your microphones on mute, and use the chat function for the questions. So again, if you could move them going forward during the actual presentations, that would be great, because we'd like to share some of your concerns with our speakers who, again, we are very, very pleased are with us here today. So first and foremost, I'm going to introduce you John Parkinson. He's from HR Go, and John, if I may, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to share my screen and make sure that's all working okay. Okay, how am I doing? Good. So hi everybody, thanks very much for having me on today. I'm John and I'm the CIO of HR Go. There's me with my pre-COVID beard and I'm still working on it, you know, growing it out like some of you will be as well, not having to be clean shaven for the office. So I joined HR Go in January 2014. At HR Go, I'm responsible for the IT strategy of the business. So we do some product development, we do IT support, and we also have some digital companies as well that I'll talk about in a second. Within our business as well, in January of this year, we started an internal incubator, which we've called the Labs team, and that's the team that I run. And that team are responsible for looking at the recruitment space, looking where there are opportunities to improve the recruitment model with technology, and we work together to build innovative new products. So I'm the third generation of Parkinson within the HR Go group. It was founded in 1957 by my nan Betty, and our current chairman is Jack, my father. So a little bit about HR Go. HR Go is a recruitment and digital group. We've got, just going through the brands quickly in case you know some of them. So Teach Right is our education brand. HR Go Recruitment, we've got offices in Kent. It's our high street recruitment brand. Ogilvy Search is a headhunting brand. The Labs team, they're an R&D function I talked about earlier. Gel, they do occupational health. Eclipse is a systems integrator and an e-commerce software business. So we implement big e-commerce platforms for retailers. RHL is technical recruitment analysis, exec tech. Okay. So there are, I'll just go back a bit. So there were three things I wanted to talk to you all about today, or three themes that I wanted to touch on when we're talking about the future of work. And I think for me, I have a bit of a techie bias. So for the non-techies of you, sorry about that. For the techies of you, good news. But I'm going to approach these three themes. The themes are technology, people, and places, and how they're changing in the world of work. And so I thought we could talk about those a little bit. So I've got this cool quote that I like from Elon Musk. Elon Musk is the CEO of SpaceX, Tesla, and Solar City. And he was on the Joe Rogan podcast, and they were talking about AI and how business and industry is going to change in the future. And he said this, he said, you could argue that any group of people, like a company, is essentially a cybernetic collective of human people and machines. That's what a company is. We're building progressively greater intelligence, and the percentage that is not human is increasing. And eventually we will represent a very small percentage of intelligence. I think he uses the word intelligence, and I think the question that we need to discuss today is what is intelligence, and what kinds of intelligence are valuable for the future, and how will the future of work change with technology? How is technology impacting the future of work? So I think the fear from most people is that technology is going to replace work that we're doing. And I think that the reality, in my opinion, is that the intelligence that we contribute is changing over time, and that our contribution will be different to businesses. So we'll be required to be more broad-looking and communicators within the business. And there are different kinds of intelligence that will be more valuable into the future, where technology is an opportunity for us to automate, and artificial intelligence is there to remove more routine tasks from people's job descriptions. But I think historically you would have referred to technology as a tool. And I think in my opinion, or what I'm seeing in the business, is that technology is becoming more of a core function of all businesses, and a much more strategic part of businesses and their products. And I think that the naming of a tool for technology is something that will soon become an antique term to use. I think you guys have all experienced that if you look at it from an individual perspective, technology is like a power up to our own capabilities. On my phone, I have access to data and can communicate with everyone in my organization at all times, and it should lead to us being more productive. And one of the benefits that we find as well is that technology helps us to be closer to our customers physically. And I'm going to talk a bit about that a little bit more when I talk about places. But we've seen, for all of you that are working from home at the moment because of COVID, you've been able to take your work on tour, and your first stop has been at home. I think in future we will make more stops with more stakeholders. And I think less time will be spent sat in offices and more time will be spent out with customers. And I think that the customers, that will deliver value to the customers on the basis that the thing that they require from us most is the intelligence that we have around emotional intelligence and how we communicate with our customers and how we understand what their needs are and their requirements. So people, I got this quote from the McKinsey Global Institute, where they're talking about the gig economy. So working 9 to 5 for a single employer bears little resemblance to the way a substantial share of the workforce makes a living today. Millions of people assemble various income streams and work independently rather than in structured payroll jobs. Up to 162 million people in Europe and the US, or 20 to 30% of the working age population, engage with in some form of independent work. And I think the questions this raises that we should talk about in terms of the future of work is how does this impact us as companies or business people, and what do we need to do to organize ourselves a bit differently? I've got an article here which is about a project that some recruitment companies are working on, and I think there are other sectors that are looking at this too. This tool is a way of recording in a ledger your previous experience and qualifications. And the idea of that is that your skills, people are more often moving between jobs and between companies. Contracting has become increasingly more common. And I think tools like this that will increase our mobility as skilled people will be great, because there'll be a central system that kind of records what experience you have and where you've worked before. And that will mean that it's much more flexible and people and skills are much more available to companies. But I think that the downside of this would be that there will be lower retention within companies, because the market will determine which skills are very desirable, and the level of flexibility in the labour market means that people will be moving more often. I think that with these new kinds of intelligence that are coming up, emotional intelligence and creative intelligence, I think that our output as business people and as employees in our companies will be more dynamic. I think people will be able to move between organizations or departments in companies to fill gaps in those departments or companies of that intelligence. And like I said earlier, it's especially in the digital fields where I operate quite a lot. Contractors make up a significant portion of the workforce, and these skills are moving between companies on a project type basis quite often. And for those contractors, they're described sometimes as T-shaped people, people that understand a very specific part of technology or a very specific part of business very well, but they have a broad foundation of knowledge, so they're T-shaped. And I think that signifies the combination of what are very specialist skills, specialist technical skills, but a broad foundation of emotional and creative intelligence that enables them to communicate effectively with people. I think as well that there's a shift in people when in companies where if you have a problem that you're looking to solve, traditionally you might have looked for a firm to solve that problem. I think in the labour markets and with the gig economy and independent work, there's a new market that's available through companies that are listing directories of people with certain skills online. And it's much more accessible for companies to go and acquire specific individuals with specific skills for their problem. And I think that the demand for this will increase over time and drive up prices, but it will mean that companies are hiring people for shorter term kind of project-based work than taking somebody on for their whole career. So the last theme that I wanted to run over was places. And I think this is the one that with COVID has had the most impact on us at the moment. Most office workers are at home at the moment. For you guys, it'd be great to hear from you in the questions on whether you in your company believe it's working and whether or not it's better or worse. And I think a lot of us are asking the questions now, what the purpose of the office is, if our productivity is just as good and people are able to work well. With the schools being closed, there have been childcare things that people have had to navigate. And I think these questions are questions that everybody is going to have to answer when people start returning to work after COVID. Specifically, I think for me, it highlights the question of whether the office is an environment for us maintaining some potentially outdated management styles. And I think that we've all had to adapt if we're managing people or working within a team during COVID about how we manage those people, also how we communicate together effectively remotely, how we check in with people to make sure they're doing okay. And I think that there are three main points really that need addressing. So that the office does solve, but if we want to solve these problems with remote working and home working in the future that we'll need to address, and those are, do the people that are working know what they should be doing? I think there's a fundamental challenge sometimes where people like to be in an office around colleagues, or managers like to have their teams near them because they want to make sure that people know what they should be doing and they're not sat there stuck or not sure of what to do. The second point, I think, is that are people motivated to do what they should be doing? There's a concern that when people work from home, they might not be as productive or as well motivated as they would be in the office. And the third one is, and can we measure or monitor their performance? Those are the three areas that I think will need to be addressed if home working becomes much more popular. And they are, in my experience, the primary concerns that people have about people working from home. But if the purpose of an office at the moment is for us to be able to see what people are doing, I believe that perhaps we're reliant on the offices because the business processes and procedures, technology and performance management haven't progressed as fast as they could have to enable remote working. And I think that if you are having offices in the future and you're deploying a remote working environment for everybody, a more flexible environment, I think that we'll need to think about what the purpose of the office will be. There are in high-tech companies around the world, offices are very different environments. They have areas for people to eat together, for people to socialize together, drink together, play games together. And I think that if you're investing capital or you're taking leases on offices, in the future, we'll need to think about what we would like the experience of the people that are going to those offices to be. Because I think if you're traveling to the office and you're a remote worker or you're home working at the moment, the purpose of going to the office is to build connections with the people around you and to have a social experience, because there is no disparity between your productivity between the two, if all else is equal. So those are the offices. I think shops in COVID. I think it's Cath Kidston have closed all of their UK stores and moved on to pure play online. I think that there will be a trend of other retailers moving this way because of COVID. But also I think they probably had their natural evolution accelerated by COVID. And I heard a quote, 10 years change in 10 weeks. I think this is manifesting itself in the retail industry. And the question that needs to be asked is, what purpose do stores, what purpose do they serve? So people are increasingly looking for product demonstrations online. Influencers are very powerful forces in driving demand for products on social media. And more often, I saw a quote from Mike Ashley the other day that his stores were having to change a lot in their working hours because stores are serving as hubs for services like returns and click and collect, where many of their customers are buying product online, but they need still a local place to go and visit, so that they can, if they've bought something the wrong size, they can go and pick a new size and return the product, or they can pick up their click and collect delivery. So for some stores already, especially premium brands, experience is a very important part of their business model. But I think my prediction is that it's going to become much more important to people, and the way that we work is going to change, and the way that we design these businesses is going to change for experience to be a much more important part of these places. I always think of TK Maxx. I'm sure there are some people in the chat who like shopping at TK Maxx, and I have a theory about TK Maxx. Their brand is that their strapline. And their brand is that they offer big brands at small prices. But the way I like to think about a visit to TK Maxx is that it feels a bit like a treasure hunt. So when I walk into TK Maxx, often I don't know exactly what I'm going to buy, but I walk around the store nonetheless, looking out for a product from a brand that I really like, or a product that I didn't necessarily know I needed. And this sort of experience may be on purpose by them, or maybe accidental, but they have managed to create an environment with their stores whereby they have a lot of stock in their stores, and the experience when visiting them is a bit like a treasure hunt, in my opinion. So lastly, I want to talk about factories, farms, and freight. I think that robotics are here. If you look at the photos from inside the Tesla factories, I visited a JLR plant before. It's quite remarkable. There are robots in those factories working very hard. Ocado, especially, there are many pictures online of their robotic picking systems that are going and collecting online orders. And in my opinion, technology has advanced very far in these areas, but in the UK, I don't see it as being very widely adopted yet. I think at the moment they're still sticking with a kind of pyramid type structure to a lot of their operations in these industries, where it's still quite bottom heavy in terms of lower skilled people doing lots of work. And I think part of the reason for that is that the capital requirements to invest in robotics and automation are too high. It's just too long-term looking for these companies to invest so much money in implementing these sorts of systems. But my prediction over time for these industries and the future of work is that structure, that pyramid type structure, will invert. And instead, what will happen is that robotics and automation will do the jobs that are still being done by people, but those people will need to move up in those organizations in terms of their technical ability. The demands from those companies to have people that understand robotics and understand technology will be higher. And given that we have a big shortage in the UK economy of technical skills, I think that the pressure will be on companies to invest in their people, to invest much more in training. There are the apprenticeship schemes and apprenticeship levies. to try and develop the skills of the people within their organizations, that they are very high-skilled jobs. Building a car, for example, is an incredibly high-skilled job, but over time, more technical skills will be required. So I think, in summary, for these companies, I think that going forward, they will develop competitive advantage on the basis of both them implementing technology and changing how their factories and farms look, but also they will develop an advantage by way of how much they're investing in their people to be able to support the new technology. So I think I'm about on time. I've done 20 minutes. So I think am I okay to hand over?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a few questions come in, which is great, John, and thank you for that overview. It's quite a shake-up in business, as we know, and there's a lot of in-depth coverage you've given us. That's brilliant. So first question, if I may then, do you believe employees will have greater demand of work-life balance and flexible working after this experience?
Absolutely, I do. Yeah, I believe people will be asking the question, if everybody's as productive at home as they are at work, do I need to drive to work today? Yeah. I absolutely think that everybody will be asking those questions right now. Okay, and we had another one associated with age, really, which is saying that with the pandemic, the gap will close more between the older and younger generations in the workplace, as the older generations have adapted to learning new technology so quickly. Can we expect in the expectations that when hiring younger individuals who may have previously been seen as advantageous to adapting quickly to their surroundings? So I guess the question really is, do you think that gap will now close, and would you say that the older population have got a better chance now in the employment workplace, I guess? I think that I talked about different kinds of intelligence earlier, and I think that technology is getting easier. I mean, that's my job, so I don't want to do myself out of a job, but in reality, the tools that are used to implement technology are getting much more sophisticated, and it is much easier now to implement technology and tools that are more out of the box, and the market is settling on defined paradigms and ways of doing things with tools that make it easier to implement technology. So that being said, if the technology is getting easier, people are getting more familiar with it. I think that the fact that across layers of the workforce, there may be other types of intelligence that are more valued in the future. And I think emotional intelligence and creative intelligence and experience and ability to communicate with people cross-function or cross-company, I think are going to be very valuable skills for the future. And they might be skills that people of an older generation have. Okay. Another question came in, I think I know the answer to some of these, but is where somebody's working from home now in the home environment, they're going to incur heating costs, which may not have been on otherwise, and will those costs be met by the employee? I guess that's going to be the case in general. Yeah, I think it varies from employer to employer. I think those with established home working policies and procedures have already dealt with that. I think from an occupational health perspective, it needs to be thought of, if this is going to be extended by companies further into the future, that people have the adequate equipment that they need at home to have a safe and productive working environment. And as much as that's about having the heating on and having broadband, it's also about if I've got a second monitor here, you know, that's an important part of me being a productive worker in our company. So I think companies, if they want to more widely deploy remote working, are going to have to take a look at their policies around how they get people set up from home and whether they need to provide them with allowances and things. Sure. And I think there is a duty on behalf of the employer for health and safety anyway, which I think most of us will be aware of that, but that's fine. Somebody said that one of the big issues I feel working from home again is the exposed in online
security, data protection and fraud. What is this likely to look like for the workplace? But I guess that's part of the health and safety aspect of the employer's duty, isn't it?
I think that's a really good question and something we've been dealing with at work at the moment. I mean, we're a temporary recruitment agency, so and some of the work that we're doing, the temporary workers are working from home themselves, and so we've had to deploy some pretty sophisticated tools around data governance and how we run these machines. I think that the tools are getting more sophisticated. I think GDPR did a lot in moving us in the right direction of people needing to understand what data was on what system and who had access to it. And thankfully, that came in and set the groundwork for us to deal with COVID in a lot of ways, I think. I also think the proliferation of more sophisticated cloud-first line of business apps has had a real big impact. The challenging area in my experience is that these new tools, they require a different approach to how you manage data and documents. You know, historically, it would be quite normal to have copies of documents on your desktop at work. However, with these applications, especially if you're using your own device, IT are going to have to put restrictions in on whether you can actually download documents and print them out at home or keep them saved on their desktop. I think a lot of these tools, they'll need to be deployed on the basis that people don't take documents down.
Okay, and just one quick question from me, John, because we have to go to the next presenter. But how is it affecting your sector? I mean, you're an employment company, let's say, and you appreciate you provide a wide spectrum of services. But with this change, we've all been thrown in at the deep end, or some businesses have had to change, as we've talked about before. So within the realms of that, do you foresee potentially in the longer term future, maybe a 4-day working week, and perhaps also where, for example, Germany is far way ahead of us anyway in productivity? I think that's going to be a key theme. Do you think that may affect your sector, or I appreciate you're going to have more moving around? Is that the right way that you might look at your future and your business?
Yeah, I think our future, in a market where there is high demand for skills and limited supply, that's good news for our sector. In that employers are demanding, or they're requiring us to help them find these sorts of skills. I think as well, the volatility in the market, seasonality, or because of things like COVID, etc., certain industries have much higher demand for like flexible labor. I think particularly in our business during COVID, contact centers have been a real growing market for us. There are many people concerned about things, whatever they are, deliveries of products or their health or anything. And in those markets, yeah, there's been a big increase. But I think looking more medium long term into the future of work, I think there's going to be much more mobility in the labor market. People are going to be moving around more often. And I think that for companies like us, we need to make it a great experience for those kinds of people. We need to make it easy for them to find work. We need to make it a good experience to do that, and not a soul-destroying experience to do that. It's a very stressful time for people moving between jobs, and so that's one of our missions. Yeah. If that answers your question.
Okay, John, that's brilliant. Well, thank you for that. And normally I'd say let's give him a round of applause, but I think we can give a little wave. I don't think everyone's going to see you, but thanks for that, John. Very much appreciated. Okay, so now we're going to come on to our next presentation. And again, I don't know if I mentioned at the beginning, but we will be sharing these slides with you. And, you can pick up all the information that you've heard a wee bit later as well. So let me introduce you then to Duncan Cochrane-Dyet. I hope I've got that right, Duncan, but fire away. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ray. Yes, you got that right. So, yeah, it's not an easy name to pronounce, half French, half Scottish. Yeah, it's caused me all sorts of troubles over the years. My name's Duncan. I'm a managing partner of MHA in Kent. MHA firm of accountants, got a national presence. In Kent itself, got offices in Canterbury and Maidstone, and part of the international firm Baker Tilly International, with offices basically everywhere, apart from the more dodgy countries in sub-Saharan Africa and various other places where business isn't really working. So if we could go on to the first slide, thanks. What I wanted to look at really is some of the forces underlying the changes in the workplace. Now, we're obviously going to have to start with the economy and money and what's going on there. But I wanted also to look at some societal forces going on and where I think this might leave us. So this is drawn from conversations we've been having over the years, both with our client bank, many thousands of corporate clients in the UK, people, personal clients as well as the international community. So hitting on the money first, there's a few quotes there from Rishi Sunak. And obviously it's the middle one was the one I think was most striking that came out last week. We're likely to face a severe recession, the likes of which we haven't seen. And we're dealing with something so unprecedented that economic forecasting is not as precise as it might normally be. So obviously we know full well that we're in the middle of a pretty bad recession. The Bank of England and I was reading the Monetary Policy Committee minutes of their meeting earlier this month. The model they're working on shows a recovery in economic activity that's relatively rapid, so the V-shaped recovery that people have been talking about as opposed to the U-shaped recovery. But there's a certain amount of uncertainty, obviously, in association with that. The important thing to notice here that the MPC judges that the core banking system has capital buffers more than sufficient to absorb losses, and supported with government guarantees for new lending, has a capacity to provide credit to support the UK economy. And that's obviously critical to know that we're in actually still a pretty strong place, regardless of all the problems we've seen over the last several months. So the conclusion of the Bank of England is that the financial system is in a much better position to support households and businesses through this period compared with the global financial crisis of 2008, 2009. Now we know we survived this, and to know that we're in a stronger underlying position is really, really important. So could we flip on to the next slide, please? It is relevant though that there's not a lot of wriggle room the bank has. Normally there's a couple of mechanisms that can be used. Interest rates is one mechanism, and quantitative easing is the other monetary policy mechanism can be used to stimulate economies and get us through hard times. The graph shows what's happened with interest rates over the last couple of decades. And actually the bank's got all this information all the way back to the 1700s. And if you quickly flip through it, I did try to amalgamate that into a graph actually, and got myself into all sorts of trouble. There's just too much data there. But the position we're in at the moment, it seems to have fluctuated more or less around 5 or 6% for the last couple of centuries, more or less, given obviously shocks from war and so forth like that. But it is quite unprecedented that we're in a position with the lending rate quite so low. So the bank's obviously got the lending rate set to 0.1%. They've announced a 200 billion increase in quantitative easing in the purchase of government bonds and corporate bonds. And this leaves us with a stock of asset purchases by the bank of some 645 billion by the end of July. So this is important because what we're saying here is that there's not a lot left in the armoury. Okay, we know that underlying in terms of capital structures and so forth from the banking structures and the capital markets, we're okay, but there's not a lot more that can be done to stimulate the economy over and above what has been done. And then we have debt to pay back, and then we also have Brexit to think about. So on the face of it, that sounds like not very good news, but actually something interesting comes out of situations like this historically. And we do have a situation in the country and also globally where a large proportion of companies, measured on a historical basis, are what we call zombie companies. So these are organisations that aren't really doing terribly much, aren't terribly successful economically, but are able to function because they're able to borrow at very low rates. Now, when the support for that section of the economy isn't as strong as it used to be, then something happens within economies. And we see a great rise in innovation. We see new methodologies of working. We see, interestingly, jobs measured by their value to society more than the value to the individual in terms of salaries and so forth. Quite an important change I'll come back to. We see flattened hierarchies going on. So that's a sense of economy that comes out of those situations, lean and fighting fit. And that's what BTI, our international association, and our firm in the UK, the next number of years coming out of this situation. Could I go on to the next slide, please? What I want to pick up on is a couple of things that have been going on within the commercial society and society at large over the last number of years, which are becoming more and more relevant in terms of the current situation and impact directly on how we can see the workplace evolving. So, excellent book written by David Graeber a number of years ago. Forgive the language, so I call this pointless jobs. He's got some slightly other, pointed terminology, but identifies a large variety of jobs that serve ultimately no purpose to society due to a theologically inspired work ethic that's convinced people that their self-worth lies in labour as opposed to the nature of the labour itself. And so that's all well and good, and that's quite catchy, but there's a number of academic studies that have been done over the years that give a little bit more weight to this. Simon Mayer's published a study quite recently, and he's a research fellow at the University of Surrey in ecological economics. And basically, the area he's looking at is how our capitalist economy functions at the moment. And the notion at the heart of that is that the notion of exchange value. So our economy is structured so that we can transfer money for benefits. So the balance within that mechanism is when the exchange value of what we're exchanging is equivalent to the use value of what we get back. So if we look at how this works at the employment level, we get paid for what we provide. But COVID-19 is throwing some of the inconsistencies of this into rather sharp relief. And it's quite clear, I think, that jobs in many critical services aren't those that tend to be the highest valued in society. So the exchange value of what people are paid to do these jobs is not the same as use value of how that benefits society. And we note that some of the best paid jobs only exist really to facilitate exchanges to make money. So there's a fracturing, if you like, of that covenant within the capitalist society. So the pandemic's highlighting that many jobs actually are not essential, and yet we lack sufficient key workers to respond in those areas that we really do value when things go bad. Now, there's a number of ideas about how you respond to that, and this is all being thrown into quite sharp relief at the moment. One of those ideas is just one, is, for example, the universal basic income, where every single person of working age is given a certain amount of money, and that's instead of going out and earning a salary. And then there's activity based on top of that according to each individual's motivations and their own life purpose. It's obviously a concept that's got advocates from the political spectrum, especially on the left, but it's interesting that it's also got quite a lot of support from various other areas of the economy, such as a global Silicon Valley billionaire, such as Elon Musk, who cites it as one of the responses of society to what will happen when machines and artificial intelligence start taking a bigger bite out of the jobs done by human beings at the moment. So we have a number of quite interesting forces going on. Could you flip over to the next one? Because this is, I think, relevant for us all within our own businesses. Values-driven leadership. So you need to go back, that's it. Yeah, that's it, thanks very much. So values-based leadership, every organisation has got a set of values, they stick it on the website. Sometimes there's a mismatch between exactly how these values are actually lived by the organisations. But if you look within this whole area, there's a couple of interesting concepts. One of these concepts is that of inclusive capitalism. So it's a move to involving individuals within the business and making them part of it. Now, we all say that people are the most valuable asset for any business, but actually making them part of the structure of the business in terms of sharing of benefits from the business over and above a salary is something that's rather harder to do and certainly hasn't been traditionally done very well. So treating people with empathy and enabling them to develop their full potential not only protects their well-being now, and especially given the uncertainties over the next few months, it also importantly and critically promotes long-term resilience for both those individuals and the organisations they work in. And the people that, certainly within my organisation, are notable at the moment are those people who are flexible and who are resilient and are able to navigate their way through harder times. Very, very important people and unusual individuals at that. Another feature of values-driven leadership is that of innovation. And it's not just the tech, it's looking at new ways of working with the tech and developing talent pools and levelling hierarchies as a result. Within my own business, one of the challenges we've had is that tech is coming down the line, but it's not quite there yet. And the global pandemic does obviously accelerate the use and take up of technology, but also its evidence importance within the organisation and therefore the investment case. So I'm going to flip on to my final slide. I mean, I work for a firm of accountants, okay, and people become accountants because they're risk adverse, because they like the rule book, because they don't like too much change in their lives. But even firms of accountants like ours are understanding there's fundamental change we need to adapt to. Now, we've put in place a team we call BIO. They've only just gone in. It marks a transition, as we see it, from a risk management phase to a best practice, innovation and opportunities phase, thus the acronym BIO. And the sorts of areas we're looking at as a firm of accountants is obviously the acceleration of digital solutions. We live in a very data-driven society, and so where our individual people sit and are really doesn't matter, provided they have access to the data and the tools that are able to analyse that data. So the conversation with our clients changes from being a once-a-year audit or something like that to actually having access to their live data and being able to have a conversation over a period of time about what that means for their business, an entirely different way of looking at it. In order to do this, it's quite clear that you've got to re-engineer the whole of the organisation. These are not things you can simply layer on top. So we do have to look at hierarchies and working methodologies. We've got to look at the way we work, our business processes, absolutely everything. Everything's driven down and it's all completely interconnected with all the technology. So a major, major project. But what the firm has recognised and our international groups recognised is that the option of going to the situation pre-COVID is not an option. That's not going to happen. And it's interesting, the firms of accountants with all their risk adverseness are saying this. You know, what are people saying within the technology industries, the media industries, the creative industries, who are going to be far quicker to seize on this? A couple of things are being thrown with quite sharp relief. Obviously, looking after people, I think very much as John mentioned before. Mental health is big on our agenda. We need to think how to navigate this, how to navigate you know, the social structures that a workplace creates when we're looking at a more devolved and dispersed workforce. So those are just a few high-level thoughts on why change is taking place and what's driving it. And taking a look as well at some of the underlying drivers within society and within capitalism itself that really do influence this and are starting to gain some more traction amongst very senior business leaders. So I hope that's not too fast to trot through all that. There's quite a lot of it within that, but I did want to hit the context. So any questions?
Okay, Duncan, well, thank you. Thank you once again for that. That's brilliant. And again, we'll be sharing these slides with you later. And I thought that you are quite ahead of the curve in relation to what you're doing. I thought it was quite good with your amusing pictures, I must say, as well. So a couple of questions, Duncan. One from me really is that I think it was yesterday or today, the Bank of England might be bringing down the interest rates to zero. I think the idea being to stimulate businesses to be able to reduce their costs or so on. Can you share that a bit more information about that with us or for our colleagues here?
Yeah, I think as I touched on, there's two main mechanisms for stimulating a response to the recession. And one is interest rates and the other is quantitative easing. in terms of the money supply. And this really is the point that we're talking about 0.1% now, that barrel is pretty much scraped dry. So in the previous, recessions we've had, it's been possible to reduce it by 10 points at once. And that has a pretty significant impact. 0.1% is more of a behavioural indicative type of a measure, if that makes sense. It's showing that the bank is taking it seriously. We do need to do this. But actually the impact of it on a purely monetary policy level is fairly limited.
Okay, great. We've got another question coming. Are clients investing, Duncan? Are they investing or people in technology, and do they have adequate cheap capital to do so in people or technology? Sorry, they're saying typo. I've just read it hours ago. So I think they're just saying that are companies investing in people or technology, or do you think it might be a mixture of both, really, I guess, nowadays?
Yeah, we're saying, I mean, there's obviously been, and you can mark it from 2008, a big hold up in investment within pretty much any arena. And technology has marched on regardless. But what's an interesting change is the importance of private equity capital flows and the globalization of private equity as well. So when we look amongst our client base, there are significant amounts of capital out there that is looking for a home, and some other places where that capital might have been deployed are no longer delivering the sorts of returns they might have delivered. And so the availability of capital really isn't that much of isn't the problem it might be perceived to be. Where the investment is going into the machinery, the processes and the technology that sit behind the people. And that's what we're seeing. And people investment is really the people who are able to drive the use of that technology and make best use of it. But I think this returns to the interconnectivity of it all within every organization. Tech isn't something you simply shove on top. It has to be fundamental, and the whole of the way the business works has to be structured around that.
Okay, and I guess just an observation from me really is that the way that things have changed again, do you think more companies will now provide add-ons, so maybe extra facilities to help other businesses, so maybe more services or maybe add layers on, if that makes sense?
Yeah, especially in terms of people, I think. I think that is certainly coming down. There's a kind of a structural side, which is the tech and the processes. To make it work properly, you need people to make it work. And it's how to incentivize, how to retain those people, how to motivate them, and how to make them feel valued as well and invested in the business. So I think John touched on an awful lot of the things that he's seeing within the recruitment industry that affect that. But certainly when we're looking at our own business, we're having to reconsider completely the way we do our training and actually what sort of people we recruit. Yeah,
that's fine. And a couple of people have provided questions here, but I think really there is a comment to say that businesses should invest in, as you say, exactly, people, technology, skills training, and AI, of course, for robotics and everything. Another question is, do you think, I don't know what this means really, do you think that helicopter money and negative interest rates are now the only options left?
In terms of stimulating the economy?
I guess so, yeah.
I don't actually, because I think that one of the features of, you saw this in the US after the Great Depression, when a lot of those, I refer to zombie companies and that section of the economy that isn't as productive as it ought to be. What underlies that is a smaller, more agile teams of people coming up with innovative solutions, innovative ways of doing business. And it's that kickoff. And I think all of us have been sat here at home, and I certainly have, thinking there must be a better way of doing the stuff I normally do day to day. Is there other things we can do? But when you free that within the excellent, well-trained, well-educated workforce we've got in that country, I think we can see some real opportunities coming out of this. And the capital will be looking to take advantage of what people are doing within that particular space. But what I am a little bit concerned of is the startup capital, the startup financing. That does need looking at.
Okay, that's brilliant. Well, that's a nice way to wrap up with, because I think, like I said at the beginning, the businesses that are the ones that push forward and use innovation technology and look at their staff and wrap everything up are going to be the winners. It's a very tall challenge. Hopefully businesses had thought about it. And obviously I wish them the very best, and I'm sure you and John do as well. So thank you to you guys for your presentations. Very much appreciate that. That's great. We're just going to share some information about a couple of events coming up fairly soon. So you can get these on the web links that you normally would get anyway. And just want to sort of reinforce that these are sent out regularly. So I think it's testament to the Chamber does keep communicating, so it's been good during this period. So I won't go through them, but you can see there's a couple of relevant ones coming up, and do check these out and keep your finger on the pulse of those. I would like to ask you to stay on for a wee bit, because there's a polling or questionnaire we'd like to gather some information from you, if you'd be so kind, particularly as we've still got 1.5 minutes left. If you're able to fill these in as quickly as you can, or when you can before you leave, that would be very much appreciated. And if you've got any feedback on any or any comments, then do let us have them as well, because you're the guys that benefit from this, and we don't fully understand what you need, but we think we've got a good profiling now. But it would leave me to say goodbye to you in a moment. I wish you have a good day and a good future, and hopefully see you one day with a cup of tea or coffee. I must say, I was quite surprised. This is the first meeting I've ever chaired without shoes on, just different for me. But anyway, have a great day and catch you soon. Thanks.